Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. So, I think we're gonna have like a really interesting conversation today. I'll first introduce who we're talking to. I'll be talking to Ramakrishnan Sivakumar. He he and I have had plenty of interesting conversations in the past, and like we always tend to like say, hey, like we should probably be recording this because like some of the stuff that we say and like talk about, I feel like I personally enjoy a lot. So his background, he's an ML software engineer with one of the bigger tech companies. So he is very close to the topic that we really want to discuss today. But before that, like I'll give him like a chance to like say hi and like maybe like add a few words about himself.
Hi guys, thanks for having me here, Rishi. Yeah, really excited to talk about everything that's going on. Yeah, the field's moving really fast. A lot of implications and a lot of open topics to discuss about. Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, as like I hinted, this one's gonna be about AI. Basically, the entire world is talking about AI. So how very original of us, right, to like also talk about AI. But I think the reason why I think this conversation is going to be pretty valuable for um, like in general is because I think the two of us, we have very different approaches to the problem, at least the way I see it. Um, every time I talk to you about AI in general, I always end up feeling much more educated about the technical side of things, how things work, like where the field is headed, like where the cutting edge research is happening at. And like for me, as much as I like enjoy like learning about the technology, my big focus is really, or like what interests me the most is like how this technology is going to like interface with society, and like how it is important for us to be thinking about what we ought to do with AI, and not just what we can do with AI. So like that's kind of like I feel like the two different um, phases at like of how we approach this topic. Maybe there's like something else that you want to add on top of this, but like that's kind of how I've seen our conversations about this kind of like pan out in the past. Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Whenever we speak, like I really get a lot of insight into, how we are thinking about it from an entirely different perspective. Being a part of, being a developer in the field, like you're too ingrained in the ways
Mm,
in what's happening right now, so you don't really get the zoomed out perspective of it. So yeah, that's what I really find interesting. And there is always multiple perspectives. There's really optimistic perspectives. There are
mhm.
other more cautious approaches. Yeah, like I'm just happy to understand what the other perspectives are and fill in some of the gaps that I'm not looking at.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And like just talking about this like AI landscape in general, it looks like most big tech giants, they want a slice of this pie. They want to get involved in this action.
Mhm.
And like it almost feels like there are companies that are at a stage of like desperation where they want to just jump on this train, especially like the LLM train. But
Mhm.
do you think it is still an accurate assumption to think that the big tech companies, basically Apple, Google, Microsoft, and I guess OpenAI, are
Mhm.
they going to be the big movers in this field? Or do you think the technology is still democratized enough for like some small startup, totally left field, coming in and like taking center stage? Or like is this like just going to be the big techs companies that are going to like shape the way for AI?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So to talk about the first part of the question, yes, this kind of seems to be like the next big revolution. And
Hmm.
if you look back, the past few decades, past 3 decades, you had kind of the dot-com, the whole thing grow up,
Hmm.
the internet revolution that happened in
Hmm.
2099 and 2000. And there was a bunch of companies, there was a lot of frenzy, and then a few companies emerged out winners who we see as some of the big giants today. And
Yep.
then there was this again mobile revolution in 2007 and 7 to 10. where you again see some of these big companies grow. And every time there is such a revolution like this, there's a lot of winners and losers, and there is a lot of transfer of wealth and capital. And AI seems to be, like the next revolution that's happening right now, and that's why
Mm,
you see all of the companies trying to get on that bandwagon.
mhm,
Uh, but at the same time, AI has also proven to be useful in many cases, like not
mm,
just be all about the hype, in my opinion. Like we've seen
mm,
such things play out a lot in the past, and we've seen crypto,
mm,
we've seen NFTs. There've been a lot of hype cycles. In my opinion, I don't think they really had a lot of use cases for the broader public. Sure, a lot of people, did find them useful, but it never got
mm,
adapted by the masses. And that's kind of what's different about AI. So that's what I'm more optimistic and excited about. And
mm,
when it comes to talking about the big tech companies, I look at it as like two different ways. Like one is the big tech companies will obviously influence how the broad user base will use and access AI. That's kind of going to look one of two ways. One is companies are going to augment AI into existing user experience
mm,
and add feature sets
mhm,
to existing, like the way people already use these products. And I would call that invisible AI, where you don't even know that there's AI involved, but you, as a user, your experience has improved. You're not really learning anything, like you're not learning a new way of using products. You're just using the same
mhm,
products over and over, but the products have gotten better.
mhm,
And in that particular case, companies that have a broader ecosystem will definitely benefit. Companies
mm,
like Google and Apple have millions and millions or even billions of users. Of
mm,
course, Microsoft too has a lot
mhm,
of users who will improve user experience, and the user would not even have to know that there is AI behind this.
mhm,
So that's going to be one class of way that people access AI. And the second one is going to be enabling completely new use cases, which were not
mhm,
possible before. The technology has come so far that the new use cases showing up. And here, the AI is going to be very visible. Like, you're interacting or you're using AI in some form or the other.
mhm,
ChatGPT is an example where you're very clearly interacting with something that you did not do before.
mhm.
And in that cases, I think there is more room for new startups and new companies to kind of come in and like make a place for themselves, where it's still an uphill battle for sure. They still
Mm,
have to go up against the incumbents and establish their space in the market. But you do
mm.
see a lot of startups showing up, and there are a lot of interesting companies that are making headway in spite of the tech giants being around.
Yeah, no, that was a very interesting observation right there, right? It is true that there is this huge advantage of like the bigger companies that have like
Hmm.
already widely adopted products that they can like
Hmm.
add AI to the workflow and it just makes things much better. The opposite side of things, like even ChatGPT, end of the day, I know we're gonna get into like some details about like some of the specifics, but like it seems like they were very desperate to get that Siri iPhone integration because like
Hmm.
that's much more important for them than for Apple.
Hmm.
So it does look like we're stuck in this like middle phase where like that advantage of having existing product
Hmm.
or like existing user bases is like huge in terms of like adoption.
Hmm.
We did see the startups come in and like fail miserably, right? With like Rabbit. Those, like you said, those are like very, very clearly advertised as like AI first products.
Yep.
As soon as we saw that, hey, like it could just be part of like Google Assistant or like it could just be part of
Hmm.
Siri, it just made much more sense to like as like a more cohesive project, like a product.
Hmm. Hmm.
What do you think like a future product that doesn't exist yet would look like that puts AI in the forefront? Like I think like a lot of talk has been about like augmented reality glasses, things like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, is that gonna be the next frontier of like how we move away from like the traditional like devices and like move towards like a more AI first like approach?
Yeah. Um, so I think when I think of the next generation of products, like they need not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily be physical devices. For
Mm,
example, the Rabbit R1 was like, this there were people porting that into an Android system, and they were
yep.
able to use the whole thing through an Android phone itself, crossing the barrier of creating a new physical device and getting people to learn and use that new device on top of everything else that they have going
Mm,
is going to be a tougher challenge than the rest of the approaches. But for me, the new products could like just be even software. Like you just access
mm,
them through your existing
mm,
approaches, unless otherwise there is a very clear reason on why you need a new physical device.
mm.
For example, the humane pen, the promise was more about, you don't need your phone anymore. You can
Yep.
just have your humane pen. That was kind of the pitch. I don't know how far it panned out. I don't think it did.
Mhm,
But if it can deliver on that promise, then I see that, a new physical device, it kind of warrants a new physical device and
mm,
users learning to use that new physical device. For
mm,
example, when this happened back in 2007, when iPhone came up with end-to-end touchscreens, there was a very clear value add and moving
mm,
away from using buttoned phones to like touchscreen phones, like the screen real estate increased, like the experience improved. So it had a clear reason. That's still not really come up in terms of
mm,
physical products. But in terms of software products, yeah, it's more trending towards intelligent automation of things. What's been popularly termed as agentic workflows, where you have a
mm,
lot of software agents, which is these versions of different LLMs in the backend, which you can talk to or interact in one way or another. Popularly talk to, and they can go ahead and get an end-to-end task complete. And that
mm,
task could require using different tools, accessing different knowledge stores, or even reasoning about certain things and putting multiple information tidbits together to figure out
mm,
what's the right thing to do, and also going ahead and performing that action. There's been a
mm,
lot of examples of such workflows that are coming out. Uh, how and they will only get better from here, and that's kind
mm,
of where things I would say are headed towards more. But that's not
mm,
like far into the future. That's more like coming up in the next few months or
mm,
year.
mm. Yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm like looking forward to, right? Like I feel like we should just I mean we can dive into like each one of the keynotes and like what all of these guys announced and stuff, but like
Mm-hmm,
my big picture impression of like what AI is capable of doing today
mm-hmm,
still seems to not match what you just described. Like I would like for my computer or my phone to
mm-hmm,
like take a task and like complete it end to end, right? Like I would like
mm-hmm,
for my computer on my phone to be like if I gave it a prompt and enough info and it knows enough information about myself, it should be
mm-hmm,
able to like plan a complete vacation for me.
mm-hmm,
Um, like that's kind of what I guess the goal is, but I do see that we're not there yet. But I do see like there is this unifying vision of like getting to a place where like there are several agents and like
mm-hmm,
one node of like communication, and like we are able to like extract like there could be stuff that's specialized in doing certain things
mm-hmm,
that does that task pretty effectively. I see the vision,
mm-hmm.
but I guess like I think we're in agreement that we're not there yet, right?
Yeah, yeah, we're not fully there for broad adoption of that, like, but there
Mm,
are still, really good, promising proof of life, instances in many places. Like something that off the top of my head is there's this work called Gorilla that was done by UC Berkeley. So
mm,
they've trained a really small LLM to use microservices across the web
mm,
in a very effective way. Like I could ask the LLM to, send you $20. And given that it knows my authentication for PayPal, like it knows to use PayPal and withdraw from my bank account and send it to you, it can
mm,
perform that action. And like it's integrated with a lot of microservices, and it can put things together,
mm,
which is a nice proof of life. Like I don't know if I will trust that with my authentication just yet. That's a whole other conversation. Yeah,
mm,
things like that are starting to show up, and
mm,
products are trying. There are things that are getting productized, but yeah, I agree with you.
mm.
We're still not there yet, but there are clear signs of us getting there.
Okay, perfect. I think we can move on to like discussing what the big tech giants announced, right? I think
Mm-hmm,
the last month or so it's been
mm-hmm,
pretty big for all four companies that we're going to discuss today. Like we'll
yep.
be talking about OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, and Apple.
Mm-hmm,
Um, but it was like it felt like one of those like seminal moments, like you discussed, you just mentioned about like there was this the dot-com revolution and like the entire switch to mobile phones, and like this is
Mm-hmm.
the next one, right? Like this,
Yeah.
and like there was so much, not just hype, like it was more so like almost like tension that the tech CEOs were like feeling. It was almost like palpable even for like
Mm-hmm.
people who were like just tuning in. Like
Mm-hmm.
it felt like there was so much at stake. So I think we can like quickly go over like each one of those and like talk about what we found interesting in like in those keynotes, and then maybe like deep dive into like some of the topics that I think might be interesting like in specific cases, right? So let's do that. Okay, I think we'll get started with OpenAI. Like we'll just
Mm-hmm.
go in the order that the keynotes happened. I think the big one from OpenAI was they announced GPT-4o.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there was a lot of like really impressive demos, I would say. Like in real time when I was watching them, like it was like um, yeah, it felt like okay, like this is the real deal. Like the speech modulation, for example, extremely
Mm-hmm.
realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like they showed several examples that you can see on the web about like telling a story in like different ways. They had it like tell a bedtime story to a kid, I think, and like there was like varying degrees of how comical they could make it, and like overall they also spoke about how like the 4.0 model was like much faster, and like you could see that really with the speed of responses.
Mm-hmm.
So it really felt like coming from like the previous versions of ChatGPT, which is much more like text based, and like you had to like it was more so like interacting with a chatbot basically. Like now
Mm-hmm.
it really felt like that moment where like it was like okay, like now this feels like one of those like proper AI assistants.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that was like a pretty huge announcement. I like at the time of announcement, I feel like the general reaction from the public was immensely positive until we got to I guess the Scarlett Johansson voice
Yeah.
scandal. I think we can touch on that later, but like I think overall, my impression at least of what OpenAI had to offer was like
Mm-hmm.
very impressive. They had always been like advertising themselves as the industry
Mm-hmm.
leader,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt like other companies kind of recognized that, and like this keynote felt like them like reestablishing themselves as like quite far ahead of the competition. That's kind of what I got from that. Like, what was your take on OpenAI's keynote?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you mentioned in terms of the model being smarter, cheaper, and faster.
Mm.
Those were kind of the updates that were expected. When you have a
Hmm.
tech company briefing, like yeah, that's kind of what you expect. And on top of that, what I really found interesting was like I got access to the 4.0 model that evening, like
Mm.
few hours after the keynote, which
Hmm.
was really impressive. I was expecting it to show up in a few weeks. Yeah, the voice has still not showed up,
Mm.
but yeah, the model was made available immediately, which I really liked. And the most interesting part for me was that the access to GPT-4o was made free. It was not just to the paid
Mm.
users like what it was before, like GPT 3.5 for free users and GPT-4 for paid users. And once 4.0 came, it was free for everyone. I was really surprised by that, and I think it's a mix of two reasons. Like one is, you know, OpenAI has reportedly around somewhere around 100 million monthly active users, which is a lot for a startup. But not okay. I shouldn't call it a startup. Which is a lot for tech companies, but it's still not in the magnitudes of Google or Facebook by any
Mm.
means. Like they have like billions of users, and 100 million is not much in that context. So they definitely want to increase the number of users that are on the platform, which makes sense. That helps them build better models. Companies want more exposure, and I would guess that it's also they've had a significant breakthrough in cost on
Mm.
how much it costs them to run an inference. So they're able to afford having so many users, hitting these models so often. So I
Mm.
think them giving this free access is a mix of these two. That part was like really interesting to me. Specifically, yeah, there were all of these demos and everything. Their text to image has gotten significantly better
Mm.
compared to even a month ago. Uh,
Mm.
if you give it some text and you wanted to make an image out of it, like the punctuations are right, everything is like
Mm.
it's great, and it's even generating new fonts. Yeah, and they are making a stake into the desktop world. Like they've been more like browser based
Mm.
and mobile based for a while, but they now have a desktop app for Mac,
Mm.
which is able to kind of interact with, not interact, but at least gather information from your desktop visually, which
Mm.
which makes it really interesting. And Microsoft has also demoed something similar through some of their open source projects called UFO, which was out like a couple of months ago, where you could use that project. It's a GitHub repository, open source. You could use that to kind of create that same interface with GPT-4 using your desktop. Like it could view your desktop
Mm.
and recommend things, or do a lot of things. It's an expensive test because you're
Mm.
using the vision part of the model. But yeah, those were some of the things that were really interesting. And yeah, in terms of smarter, again, made headway on all of these benchmarks, these accuracy benchmarks across,
Mm.
coding, language understanding, vision, math. I'm
Mm.
sure we'll talk more about these benchmarks later on. Uh, but yeah, that was some of the most interesting parts of the keynote for me.
Yeah, no, like one thing that you touched on was like they made 4.0 free, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
now, like as we'll eventually touch on, like 4.0 is also available for free through Siri, in Apple's ecosystem.
Yep.
How do you think monetarily this makes
Mm-hmm.
sense for them? Do you think there's going to be enough users subscribing to the premium versions of their like language models, or like is there going to be like a fundamental way in which some of these LLMs are going to like reinvent how they monetize use from the from like a providing free service to users perspective?
Yeah, so I think there are two distinct ways of monetizing the LLM. One
Hmm.
is, where we directly interact with it through this chat interface. We type in something and then it gives us a response.
Hmm.
And that's one way of doing it, where they charge $8 a month for the advanced access. And then the
Hmm.
other way is through the API, where you have people who are building apps who your interface is completely different. You don't even know it's GPT-4 in the backend. You just interact with the app anyway. It could be a camera, it could be like you're writing on something, and that talks to GPT-4 O in the backend. And that API is not free. Like they are
Mm.
charging for those APIs. And I would assume that as we move forward, the number of inferences through APIs are going to be much higher than what people use
Mm.
through the chat interface. So if the more apps that get developed on top of GPT-4, which will happen if more people get to use GPT-4 4.0
Mm.
through the freeway. So it's like more getting people on the platform, and then there are more people who are building apps. So you make revenue out
Mm.
of that. So maybe this is kind of the last leader, as
Mm.
retail companies would call it. That's kind of how I see the monetization working in this case. It's not. It's a very
Mm.
definitely very calculated decision, but the
Mm.
number of voice, yeah, it's going to open up to so many Apple users, iPhone
Mm.
users. It's going to be interesting on how that plays out,
Mm.
because Apple is also not directing all of the questions to ChatGPT. They're
Yep.
doing a
Yep.
lot on the device. They're doing quite a
Mm.
bit on the private cloud. So I
Yep.
think it's not going to be everything that goes to GPT-4 for free. So it's going to be a
Hmm.
good mix, but yeah, we'll see
Hmm.
how that numbers play out.
Yep. Yep. And this is a bit of a tangent, but like, how has the trend for like you spoke about cost to like make these inferences? Like,
Mm-hmm.
is that something that's like exponentially going down? Like, do we expect it to go down, or like, are we gonna hit like a baseline cost
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like compute power and like data centers that we need
Mm-hmm.
in order to like sustain these large language models?
Yeah, so cost has been significantly going down, like driving
Okay.
the cost down. I think this is just like any other technology, like to get
Mm.
more people on it, like you have to drive the cost down. The cheaper
Mm.
it is, you get more users, and
Yep.
that kind of drives that virtuous cycle.
Hmm.
So yes, cost has been going down because of advancements in the architectures of the model, the algorithmic advances, the improvements that are showing up on the hardware and software space from multiple dimensions. Like it's being the approach is driving the cost significantly.
Mhm.
So that's definitely happening. But yeah, I think the other thing that you touched on was the power, which is something that's probably showing up as the biggest barrier today, where the
Mm.
more and more people that get on such platforms, like it could be any LLM, right? Like not just GPT-4, the number of GPUs that have to be deployed and the amount of power that they consume is not minimal. So
Mm.
there is a power wall that people are hitting already, where even if you have GPUs, you cannot really deploy them because the utility companies cannot give you enough power, which
Yeah.
is which is by itself is
Crazy.
really mind blowing. So yeah, the top two things driving costs down. I think up there is efficiency, where you want
Mm.
to make things more efficient, so you can
Mhm.
deploy uh, more for users.
Yep. Yep. Really interesting. I think we'll move on to Google. I think Google, um, it really was a mixed bag, I would say. At least one difference that I noticed watching the Google keynote straight after OpenAI came out with, I felt like Google spoke a lot more about like security. They spoke a lot more about like responsible AI. They spoke about tagging content that was created with AI. It definitely felt um, like luxuries that a larger company with more manpower could afford to do. Google were doing, and I was like happy that they are doing that and like they are like investing resources to do that. So that
Mm-hmm.
was kind of like one positive that I guess I saw.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the big announcement, I guess, was like Google basically took their language model. They took Gemini and they
Mm-hmm.
basically stuck it dead center in front of search, right? Like they spoke
Yeah.
about generated or like generative searches, where
Mm-hmm.
like they basically replace the traditional search and you get a bunch of links
Mm-hmm.
into like a page that like has generated content. It's like much more to the point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so in theory, that sounds like a much better experience. Um, it also has like some interesting ramifications
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like, hey, like what does this do um, for like basically all of the internet that's kind of like geared towards Google search rankings, right? Like so you like if you are a small business owner or like if you're any website, basically your visibility depends on like where you show up in Google search. And if
Mm-hmm.
you get replaced with a generated web page that is like basically scraping content from your website,
Mm-hmm.
um, like yeah, you're basically throwing a big knife in the cog. So like it's kind of surprising to say the least that Google decided to go with something so aggressive and like
Mm-hmm.
such a big change to like their biggest product. Search is
Mm-hmm.
Google's like biggest product by far.
Mm-hmm.
So like I was just surprised that Google went this aggressive
Mm-hmm.
with their changes. Almost felt like desperation. Like one, I guess like advantage that you kind of like touched on like previously, like accessibility is like
Mm-hmm.
quite a big thing, right? Like if you have products that you already own and like if AI can integrate into that workflow, that's going to be a big advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And Google search is basically everyone's like access to the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that Google has that, you would think could play in their advantage, but like the fact that they've decided to go with something so aggressive
Mm-hmm.
was surprising to me. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you think this was the right move? Like, do you think it makes sense to be aggressive right now and like iron out the bugs later, or like should they have been more conservative with their approach?
Yeah, I think it was more like would almost call it a success disaster, where
Hmm.
they've been owning the internet for so long and they have so many
Hmm.
users and like so much revenue out of the search model. Do you really like do you really cannibalize that with everything
Hmm.
else? But at the same time, with all of these new technologies showing up, Google also had to respond with something.
Yep.
At the same time, they had the most to lose,
Hmm.
which is, puts them in a very weird position where you
Hmm.
cannot not do anything. but whatever you do will have so much scrutiny because of the type of exposure you have. And you kind of got that exposure because you were so successful in the past.
Mm.
And that's kind of that you see that see them under a bigger lens than the others, even with their generative search results.
Mm.
Some of their hiccups are spoken about a lot more. It's not that the OpenAI model is perfect. Like there are a lot of times those models hallucinate as well.
Mm.
But somebody going into that interface is probably
Yep.
expecting some inaccuracies, but people are not expecting inaccuracies with Google
In
because they've
search.
just been
Yep.
so good so far.
Yeah.
It puts them in a really weird position. But yes, and I think it was an aggressive move to kind of replace or stick that up on top of your web page. How like they before that they did announce their own Gemini search space and all of that. I don't know how much traction that had. But in
Mm.
my personal experience, I've found the OpenAI models, or
Mm.
let me put it this way: like I've found that I'm not really happy with the model answers that I get from Google,
Mm.
even on the generative search. Like for me personally, I'm seeing that I'm not using Google as much as I used to. I'm using more of ChatGPT and Perplexity. Perplexity is
Mm.
also a search product, which, in my opinion, seems to be a little better.
Now, this is a very interesting topic, right? Like, so now we're talking about large language models
Mm-hmm.
almost to replace search engines, right? So
Yes.
my default setting
Mm-hmm.
has always been Google searches are one thing. Like you
Mm-hmm.
said, it's like I go to Google searches in order to like get my list of web pages.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I can then do my own like mind work to like
Mm-hmm.
determine if something is true or not. I
Mm-hmm.
tend to like think, I don't know if like other people are like more careful with this stuff, but like once you get to a place where like you're talking about generative answers and like you're basically getting answers to questions that you've asked, it
Mm-hmm.
becomes much more difficult to like make that extra effort to like do a fact check. And like that seems to be essentially what Google has broken, right? Like they've kind of like they're kind of like trying to merge those two things into like
Mm-hmm.
one product,
Mm-hmm.
um, which kind of like leads me very nicely into like this entire problem of like accuracy and like hallucinations.
Yep.
Like in my eyes, for a large language model to be my primary source of information, I
Mm-hmm.
expect a certain level of like accuracy or at least so I can know where I got the information from,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm able to like at least do my own like verification on top of like like instead of just trusting wherever it got the information from. And like that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't seem to be present in the current state of LLMs. So like I interact with LLMs in a totally different way, right? Like so my most common use case right now for LLMs, which is kind of funny, is like when I'm playing a video game, I use
Mm-hmm.
it for like if I'm stuck somewhere, I use it for answers. Like I know that it is not high enough impact. Like if even if it gives me the wrong answer, maybe I lose like 5 minutes of my
Mm-hmm.
time, but it doesn't make me make like a wrong financial decision.
Mm-hmm.
Or like it doesn't affect me in that way. So like I've very like consciously put this like barrier between like important stuff and what I would use LLMs for.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you think that LLMs are going to get to a place where they can be true replacements for search engines, or are Google just ill-advised in their approach to like what they're doing right now, where they're trying to like basically make the LLM part of their search like experience, right?
Yeah. No, I think yes, they can. Given like
Mhm.
just like the gaming workflow is actually really interesting. I haven't tried that. I
Mhm.
should.
Yeah.
But the way I've kind of split all of my queries into like two buckets. Like
Mhm.
one bucket is okay. I'm trying to generate something. I'm either
Mhm.
trying to you know ask it like give it a really bad version of the email that I wrote, and I am asking it to make it sound more polite or make it sound more
Mhm.
formal or whatever,
Mhm.
where it generates some text based on some inputs that I've given. or I'm trying to generate some code, like, write me a Python function to do
Yep.
this or that. So that's like one category of queries that I have, which
Yep.
I'm using ChatGPT for.
Hmm.
But when I'm searching for something where I know, the answer already exists, I just, wanted to find that answer for me. For example, like how
Hmm.
many monthly active users does OpenAI have? Like that's not something that I want the model to generate and think of.
Hmm.
I just wanted to fetch this information for me because I know it exists somewhere. So, and that's
So,
the use
so
case.
sorry
Sorry, go
for
ahead.
interrupting, but like, how do you know
Hmm.
that it is getting the right answer to that question, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's what I'm getting to. So
Mhm.
that so the result that I'm getting is not just something that the LLM generated. I want it to be
Hmm.
grounded in real world information.
Yep.
So anytime it's giving me something, like for example, that's kind of how Perplexity works. When you ask it a query, it's going to list out a bunch of things, but for every line that it tells you, it's going to link back to an original article. And
Hmm.
you click that link, it'll go to the original page, and you can find the same information. So it's not really
Hmm.
generating things. It's just absorbing information from websites and it's just displaying it to you in one page. It would just give me like if I had done a Google search and I have a list of 10 links, I go into each one of them and then write some notes up. That's exactly what Perplexity would already give me. And it would link
But
back to the original articles.
do you need a large language model to do this stuff? For example, Google have already had like their like machine
Mm-hmm.
learning generated like, preview answers, which basically
Yeah.
did the same thing, right? They would just give you like a quick summary of
Mm-hmm.
like an answer from a web page, and it would just put the web page right below it.
Mm-hmm.
What value does an LLM add on top of that? Right? I would think you're right. Like definitely the first two use cases that you mentioned, I think those
Mm-hmm.
are the big selling points for LLM, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I need help with an email or like writing code, absolutely. I see how like those generated answers are it infinitely improves my workflow.
Mm-hmm.
But if the goal of the LLM is to just provide links and like text that is like
Mm-hmm.
already embedded in a website,
Mm-hmm.
is that really like, do I need an LLM for that? Like, isn't that already exist in traditional search?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is where the Google generated question answers, most of the times they're not exactly the question that you are asking. They're
Mm,
kind of close, and then you click on it, like, yeah, sometimes you do get the answer out of it.
mm,
And the second issue for me is like right now when I do a Google search, like this happened like probably a couple of hours ago. The first four links are sponsored links, and then I have
exactly.
to scroll down to find the next set of links, which I really don't want to do because there is a better experience. Like that's how it was before. And that was the only
Mm,
way we could use it, and that's what we were doing. But now there's a better experience
mm,
that exists, and I don't really want to look at for sponsored links. And sometimes like I click on a sponsored link without knowing it's sponsored, and I don't understand why I'm getting this link. For example, I'm searching for Alaska Airlines, and the first link is a sponsored Southwest Airlines link. I don't really need that. And the second key differentiator is when you have this LLM generate the summary and it links
mm,
back to all of the original pages, what you can do is ask a follow-up question, or you can select one particular, like let's say it gives you a bulleted list of 5 things. You can select one particular line and ask a follow-up on that particular line. And it's like one
mm,
conversation. Like I'm not doing a second Google search, which does not have the conversation of the previous search. Here I'm
mm,
having a follow-up conversation. I'm building on that. So by the end of
mm,
that conversation, I have like everything I need, and like the chat also exists for further questions. So that
mm,
connectedness is and the context that it builds while still being grounded in real world information
mm.
is kind of what for me makes me pick this tool over traditional search.
Okay. Have you had experiences where like you have been able to like pick out hallucinations, or like has there been times where like you've trusted information
Mhm.
from ChatGPT and then you eventually find out that it was wrong?
On ChatGPT, yes,
Mm,
that's been a case quite a few times. But yeah, you do
mm,
expect that. Like I would expect that 1 in 4 or 5 searches
mm,
has some form of inaccuracies, but I'm okay with that for the way I'm using that tool. And for Perplexity, I'm making sure that it's grounded. And if it's critical information, I'm looking at that and also
mm,
going into the web pages, making sure that it's right. Maybe you build trust over time on these models.
Mm.
but I've not really had that issue a lot for search type of queries.
Okay. I think we'll keep moving for the sake of time.
Yeah.
Like one other thing that I did want to quickly mention between ChatGPT and Gemini before we move over to like
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I noticed, again, like this is like again like touching on this theme of like accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
I have found myself, despite having bad answers from Gemini, which is why I
Mm-hmm.
asked you about like ChatGPT. I know that I get bad answers from Gemini, but I
Mm-hmm.
think my overall usage of Gemini has been much higher simply because of the fact that I could take my phone and
Mm-hmm.
like press the assistant button
Mm-hmm.
and it just launches Gemini. So like that seems to be, at least for a person like me, where like I don't, or at least like I'm not um using it for like work per se,
Mm-hmm.
or for like coding.
Mm-hmm.
In a day-to-day use case where I just want to know stuff, or like I said, when I'm just like playing a video game and like I need to like get an answer, like I've found it to be like just as good. Like probably ChatGPT does a better job, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't like I get what I need from Gemini. So like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
seems like just that one factor that
Mm-hmm.
I can just press this button and like speak to Gemini seems to have already won the Gemini versus ChatGPT battle for me personally as a user. This, like, how big of a handicap is this going to be for OpenAI? Or do you think um, with the Apple integration, this is just going to be like nullified?
I think with the Apple and Microsoft integration, and
Mm.
Apple integration in both MacBooks, like across all device lines, and Microsoft PC integration, I think it's like Google has a worthy opponent.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, I don't think they are in that much of trouble because Google has this Android playground. So yeah, they do have their own platforms right now,
Mm.
which is gonna make it like all the more interesting.
Okay. Yeah, let's keep going because like
Yeah.
I think um, what we're going to talk about next is Microsoft and Apple, and we're
Hmm.
still probably going to come back to 4.0 because
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of like what Microsoft and Apple are doing has stuff to do with OpenAI.
Yep.
The next one was Microsoft. So
Hmm.
they announced the Copilot Plus PCs. Now we're
Hmm.
like in an interesting time frame where we're recording this because like the first Copilot Plus PCs with the Snapdragon X chips are like starting to get reviewed. So like
Hmm.
there's a little more context on like the promises made and like if they actually delivered. I'll be honest with you, when the event was announced, I was like
Hmm.
legitimately buzzing. So this is
Hmm.
right at the back of like when I finally gave in. I was so frustrated with my Windows laptop, and I finally
Hmm.
bought a MacBook, right? And then like few months in, like now there's this big announcement like we're going to move to ARM and like it's going to
Hmm.
be awesome. They're talking about benchmarks where it's like comfortably beating M3 laptops,
Hmm.
sorry, M3 MacBooks. So like um, at least during the keynote, I was sold, right? Like I was thinking, okay,
Hmm.
is this like one of those like Windows 98 like huge moments for Windows where they like come back fighting and like they take away Apple's expanding MacBook market share.
Hmm.
Um, and also they did announce a lot of like tight integration for
Hmm.
Copilot and OpenAI with a lot of like the tools inside the Windows ecosystem.
Hmm.
Um, they have the now a lot of laptops are coming out with a dedicated Copilot button. And they all like the big feature that they announced was recall. I think we can touch on that separately, but when they announced recall, I was like legitimately impressed and excited for it. Like this seemed to
Hmm.
be like one of those like, okay, this is what I think AI needs to do. Like it should know things about me that, and it needs to be genuinely helpful. And like
Hmm.
at least on initial my initial impression was hey, this is like insanely impressive, right? So that was my feeling on the day of the event. Like, did you feel the same, or like did you have like a more um like were you more like conservative with their excitement, or like did you also feel like this was like a huge moment for Microsoft?
Yeah, I was definitely excited. Like I was at the keynote at Build
Mm.
when all of this was happening, but I was excited for like a few different reasons.
Hmm.
And I'm happy to know that you're on the excited camp and not on the terrified camp about recall, which quite a few people were.
We'll
Uh,
we'll get into that. We'll
yeah.
see how where I am, because I'm not sure, but yeah, keep going.
Yeah, so the key part that I was really excited about was AI getting to the edge. Like
Mm.
that is something that I've been working on for many years, and it's been a really long road for quite some time. Like there were not
Mm.
really use cases that made people care about doing it,
Mm.
but now there are a lot of use cases that people do care about.
Mm.
One again, touches on us talking about driving the cost down.
Mm.
Nothing drives the cost down than completely offloading it off your data centers
Mm.
down to the user's own hardware.
Mm.
And privacy is is a big concern for a lot of people
Yep.
in general, and all the more so with AI. Yeah, AI getting down to the edge and having real world use cases that a lot of people
Mm.
will find useful was something that I was really excited about.
Mm.
And yes, so this is a pivotal moment for laptops in general, not just
Mm.
any laptop.
Mm.
But yeah, for Microsoft, definitely, like this is kind of a key moment where they have something that competes with the rest of the ecosystem.
Mm.
They do already have the majority of the market share
Mm.
for laptops and desktops, but this kind of
Mm.
adds a cherry on top
Mm.
in enabling these use cases with you know improved privacy and like new ways of using the system at like the laptops all the more useful to you is definitely exciting. But that does not mean that Apple's going to stop.
Yeah.
Apple has always has a great track record on execution.
Mm.
So they're obviously coming out with their own features, and they are gonna again flex their vertical integrated muscles
Yep.
on their
Exactly.
models and all of that. So yeah, I think it's like Ali versus Fraser on the laptop world. But yeah, I'm definitely excited for this.
Yeah. No, yeah, like absolutely. The vertical integration of Apple, like I
Hmm.
feel like the one thing that I noticed, even with like what Microsoft had to announce,
Hmm.
they had a lot of like for example, they had the dedicated window for like where you would have your like interactions with the language model,
Hmm.
but it still couldn't do things like um hey, change this exact setting for this like mouse or keyboard thing that's been bothering me, right? Or like
Hmm.
troubleshoot this issue and like fix it yourself.
Hmm.
I feel like those are the kind of things that Apple is gonna like come in with like their vertical integration, and it's just gonna be like so easy for them to like do because they have just so much more control over everything
Hmm.
that's going on. But I still think this is like huge. Like I think this is like a big moment for them.
Hmm.
And like I think we can like kind of go into like um, the elephant in the room around all of this excitement and like basically the shitstorm around privacy that
Hmm.
followed the announcement, right? So
Hmm.
recall, for people who don't know, is basically, and like feel free to correct me if I'm like describing this wrong, is basically your laptop is like constantly monitoring activity your desktop. It is capturing screenshots of what you're doing. I think they said at a 5 second interval, or like maybe
Hmm.
even more frequent than that. But it's essentially monitoring all your activities, capturing those screenshots, storing all of that information locally on the computer itself, and then the language model, like it adds this information on top of everything else that it has. So now it just has so much more personal context,
Hmm.
and it also has this like quite literal photographic memory. So like they suggested examples like, hey, what was this one thing that I was looking at, this one website I was looking at a few days ago that I forgot about.
Mm-hmm.
Now your laptop's gonna know and like pull it up. So it just makes for like some truly like I guess like magical like experiences that like were never possible in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But there was just like this insane pushback about like privacy concerns. And I
Mm-hmm.
think on reflection, it's quite fair given like Microsoft's previous track record. And
Mm-hmm.
also, I read some articles about how there wasn't much encryption happening when things were being stored locally. So there was questions about like, hey, like what if there was um like a ransomware attack and like people have access to your local hard disk,
Mm-hmm.
and now they have way more information than they used to,
Mm-hmm.
traditionally speaking. So it just like added just one layer of like I guess like added data tracking that
Mm-hmm.
made a lot of people uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it was enough for Microsoft to basically delay the feature. Like all of the review units
Mm-hmm.
that are going to review us right now, they don't have the feature. So they're talking about it was initially supposed to be a default opt-in, and like you can opt
Mm-hmm.
out if you wanted
Sure.
to, and like now it's going to be an opt-in feature. So like there's definitely a lot of pushback around this. So like I'm still on the fence about some of
Mm-hmm.
this. I can see how this is extremely useful.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is going to be like useful enough and like a big enough game changer for me to be like, okay, I'm gonna trust Microsoft with this information.
Mm-hmm.
And Microsoft, unlike Apple, where they had this huge emphasis on privacy, where they invited like external regulators to come in and like verify their code. They made it like publicly available.
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft did not publicly announce anything of that sort. So like
Mm-hmm.
there's some, I guess there's stuff that Microsoft can do to like make me a believer.
Mm-hmm.
But right now I'm still like on the fence about this. But like, what are your thoughts on this in general? I know this is like a topic that's pretty close to your like what you work on. So I know like there's
Mm-hmm.
going to be I know it's something that you're going to be passionate about. So like this is going to be
Yeah.
interesting.
So yeah, I think in with this, I think in my opinion, this is not what is announced, but in my opinion, there are a few reasons to do this the way they did it.
Hmm.
One is like your the horizontal integration again comes into play here. Like
Hmm.
a feature like this is useful only it has entire collective uh, understanding and context.
Yep.
And if you're using like a very horizontal ecosystem where you're using different vendors for different use cases, which is what happens when you're using like a laptop,
Mm.
using different websites, you're using different applications. Unless Microsoft gets integrated through APIs with all of these different providers, they cannot really get that information to make this feature useful for you. And
Mm.
half-baked information is less useful than no information.
Mm.
So that's kind of the taking of screenshots of your visual representation of the screen and processing that is kind of the way they get around that.
Mm.
But should they be getting all of that information is a totally different question. Like the chats on your WhatsApp web, does that
Mm.
should that should Microsoft have access to that? Should Facebook
Mm.
be okay with them? Meta be okay with them doing that? Like that's a
Mm.
separate question. But
Mm.
to make that feature useful is why they had to have the visual representation instead of
Mm.
integrating with each vendor because that's not really possible because there's so many
Yeah.
different vendors.
Yep.
Uh, and in that announcement, the sad part was the term screenshots got more attention than AI on device.
Yeah.
That part was sad. But yeah,
Mm.
I think all of the privacy concerns are fair. So the processing is not happening on the cloud. So you're not shipping information to the cloud, which makes things a little better. But that information, like, is it open to attacks? Like, is it open to, or do you really trust Microsoft as a big tech to,
Mm.
walk their talk? So all of those concerns are still, completely
Mm.
unaddressed. So as a developer, I'm excited, and as a user, I'm
Mm.
still looking for those answers myself. So the way I was thinking of this was, in spite of working on this for quite some time, given that feature, would I opt in or opt out
Mm.
personally? I could not confidently say that I'll opt in. So that's, I don't know if I directly answered your question, but that's that's kind of where I am as well.
Interesting. No, that's yeah, this is one of those difficult ones, right? Like you're
Yes.
exactly right, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's practically going to be impossible
Mm-hmm.
for Microsoft to get all of the applications,
Yep.
vendors, like it's going to be impossible, right? And like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
they had to come up with something else, and like this feels like an elegant solution almost.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like I think like they could have done something with the way that they advertise this. Like it feels more like a marketing
Mm-hmm.
disaster
Mm-hmm.
than a technological disaster. Like I feel like a lot of what Apple said in their
Mm-hmm.
keynote, which we'll get into right now, is like they spoke about like on-device processing, and like it was like just received much better than what Microsoft did, and that also revolves around like the persona that Apple has built for itself over like several decades.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a combination of that, like several things, but like it's just unfortunate, like you said, like a lot of focus went on like certain things, but I think
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, it is good that like Microsoft is having to um, take responsibility and like come up with um, like more responsible ways to do this. I think like
Mm-hmm.
overall, it is the right thing. I feel like it was the right outcome. I just hope that we don't end up with a severely nerfed or um, like in some way like not as valuable version of this product when it finally does ship. I hope that
Mm-hmm.
there is a world in which we can get good privacy and also have all of these true useful AI features. Yeah, like this is one of those things that would otherwise be impossible, right? Like so that's where I feel like AI should like exist, like it should do things that weren't previously possible.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would also like to see this ship, but at the same time, first generation technologies are bound to
Hmm.
have a lot of chaos and backlash and
Yep.
changes, which is inevitable, and in a way, it's good that it's
Mm,
being pushed back on. But I'm confident that things will work out because there is some of the best minds and big
mm.
dollars behind making this work. So yeah, I think we will see a better version of this than what was announced eventually.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. Like that was an interesting topic. Like you just said, like the best minds and the biggest dollars are involved in this. I wanna get into that, but we'll hold off for now.
Yep.
But we'll finish up quickly.
Yep.
WWDC. I think we kind of referenced this in a lot of the other stuff that we were talking about. But I think again, probably out of all the tech companies, I think Apple had the most successful keynote. Like it was like widely positive, except for Elon. Um,
Mhm.
everyone liked it. I think
Mhm.
extremely impressive what they announced. A lot of changes to iOS as well. I don't think we need to talk about that, but like
Mhm.
basically they just made iOS Android.
Yep.
Um, so
Yeah, I was waiting for that from you.
so they've finally learned. But no, but like a lot of what um, Apple said,
Mhm.
finally breaking their their policy of never mentioning artificial intelligence in a conference. They finally reference it, and then they immediately brand it as Apple Intelligence in typical Apple fashion. It looks like they're doing a lot of like really interesting thing,
Mhm.
like a lot of on-device intelligent stuff, and then they also spoke about their private cloud compute, which um, the technology seems extremely interesting there. And like they also spoke, like I said, about how they're making all of these privacy oriented things like verifiable by external agencies.
Mhm.
So a lot of like what Apple said revolved around like privacy and generative models. It doesn't, they didn't really show too many use cases of like how smart their model is. But they just had this like, hey, if our model can't deal with it, we'll just ask ChatGPT. And they also left themselves open to being like, it's not just going to be ChatGPT. We just picked ChatGPT because it's the industry leader right now. So they really set themselves up for like long-term like success. Like they allowed room for them to like pivot. And it really reflected in terms of them like the market, right? Like they started off before WWDC behind Microsoft and Nvidia, and like they like for a little bit they went back to number one before they eventually like dropped down again. But definitely a lot of what they said impressed the shareholders. So like I guess like this like overall very impressed with what Apple did, and like it really showed how Apple as a company have traditionally, even when they haven't hurried to get to a technology, they tend to do it right more often than not, and it seemed well thought out and like well implemented. Overall, like very positive from my end on what Apple is doing. What are your thoughts on WWDC?
I think what you just said itself is a big endorsement from Team Android for Apple. But yeah, really good, keynote on WWDC. I was really excited, and it was a bunch of really clever things, in my opinion. Just like you said, Apple has, even though when they're late to the market, they execute well, and it's a near perfect implementation most of the times. It's useful, it works as expected, it works as it was promised. And that was something that was not really sitting well with LLMs and the whole hallucination problems, and that doesn't really sit well with the brand of Apple. So I think what they did was really clever, where they would do everything with their own models in their own cloud, but when there is a risk of hallucination, they would offload that to
Yeah.
ChatGPT. And like, if something went wrong, it's not us, it's them.
Yeah.
Kind of
The
a
big
thing.
label saying
Yeah.
it's ChatGPT, not us, right?
Yeah. So that was really clever.
Yeah.
And I think it's like a very it's a good win-win deal for both of them. Yeah, you mentioned at the beginning as well where, uh, you know, who needs who more. But I think it's very clear that both of them need each other a lot, because there's no, according to reports, there's no money exchanged. Like
Exactly. Yeah.
nobody is paying anybody here. So
Yeah.
Apple needs someone else to kind of take care of the hallucinations while also being the industry leader. He needs the exposure that Apple can give them. So it's like a good win-win deal for them. And in terms of some things that were a little un-Apple-like, was their new models. They are sticking that to only the highest end devices, only the iPhone 15 Pros, which is not like them. Like their support goes back many generations usually, but there
Are
are
you sure?
some.
I mean, I feel like they've been doing that more recently, right?
Not
Or
with such big features.
maybe they just do it with hardware. I think software is more, they
Oh
tend
yeah,
to
yeah.
give it to like, yeah,
Yeah, I meant software. Yeah,
yeah,
software is what I'm talking about. Like if there's a new iOS update, it's not that it's only for the current
yeah,
phone. But
yeah,
right now, these new features, or at least these models, are only for the highest end phones. Not even the 15, just 15 Pros for that matter.
yeah,
Which was new, but I'm sure there are very clear reasons. Like there have been user experience glitches when you do it on the older phones. But they had also announced, they released a technical publication on their own models, on how they are beating Microsoft's state of the art on the models for edge devices. Microsoft's models, they have a 5 series of models, like 5.1, 1.5, 2, and 3. And Apple's models, which are of similar sizes of those models, again, this is the algorithmic model architecture trend shrinking down towards the edge, where smaller models are getting really good. Apple has reported that their models beat the Microsoft models, which would be running on Microsoft Edge devices. But yeah, none of us have gotten a look at these models or how well they perform.
yeah,
But again, the use cases, like usual, they spoke more about the use cases on the keynote. They did not talk about technology as much. That came later in a publication separately, which I think we can link in the show notes. But yeah, they showed how it's going to be integrated throughout the device when you're writing an email, how it's going to be right there. There are also some fun use cases like generating emojis and stuff, which I don't know how useful they'll be. But yes, they again have their integration. They're more contextual. They have a lot of context on the device, and they've been talking about privacy for a lot longer than anyone else. And they've also they've used incidents like the San Bernardino incident to show how committed they are to privacy, even when the government steps in. So yeah, they really have that brand on for a while, and they're making use of that, and they're encashing that check with all of the AI stuff. The private cloud compute is a good middle ground for things that they want to do more powerful stuff. Not good enough. The phone hardware is not good enough for it. So that's interesting to see how, and that's Apple Silicon. Apple Silicon servers are kind of new. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out and how seamless the integration is between these three stages, right? Like you have the local one, the private cloud, and ChatGPT. The last one's kind of clear; they ask you for permission. There was a lot of reaction around integration with ChatGPT, like you mentioned from Elon as well. But I'm not entirely sure if all of that reaction was warranted because it doesn't look like deep operating system level integration. It's more like a query that goes up with that specific information and comes back with an answer, which might not be giving OpenAI access to your entire phone, which could be completely different. But this by itself is new for Apple. So, yeah, like a very interesting keynote, and kind of, there was a lot of scrutiny on them for not talking about AI for a while, but they did come back with a really good response. But now, yeah, like I cannot wait for the software update. And I'm even thinking about getting a device that will be ready to do these things. So might even drive the upgrade cycle. The upgrade cycle for phones had slowed down over many years, so this could even kickstart that cycle again.
Yeah. See, Apple won. They made you buy a phone.
Yeah.
Oh my God. No, but no, this is, there was a lot of interesting things that you just touched on, right? Like from the fact that like the private cloud compute is running on Apple Silicon. So like they have like this insane level of like integration, like vertical integration, right up to the cloud is running like on the same silicon. So like definitely they're gonna have like they're going to be able to do some like really interesting things. Like, and like you said, like I felt like this was the first keynote where like there was a lot of actual interesting things on an OS level through the local model. For example, using AI to like rank your notifications, it like knows which notifications are important rather than like showing you a bunch of stuff. Like those are the kind of things that I feel will be super valuable. I don't know like if I'm a fan of like the generated emojis and things like that, but I guess it's going to be pretty popular in the US because of iMessage use. But like Apple they really like showed out as like a company that understood the market, and like I think like it was a big win for them. So I think like that nicely transitions into like our last question that we had for this section, which was like to discuss who do we think was the biggest winners and biggest losers. I think the biggest winner is pretty clear because I think we agree on like Apple being the biggest one, unless you think there's someone else. But
I think a close tie between Apple and OpenAI.
OpenAI,
But yeah, again, like that is specific to these bunch of keynotes, because otherwise it's like too early to call winners and losers. Because like the starter pistol for this sprint has barely gone off. Google seems to have had a bad start off right away. Yeah, I think big tech is usually resilient to such things, and yeah, never write Google off for anything. So I think we are in for a good race, at least. Yeah, I think in terms of these keynotes, it's OpenAI and Apple right up there. Because for me, OpenAI kind of ties into two other keynotes, which kind of gives them some additional points.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think overall Google probably had the most lackluster showing. That being said, like I feel like there's going to be like this tipping point where we go from like search being this like mess, like it's suggesting add glue to like cheese on pizza, like whatever, like it's going to go from there to being like where the LLMs get to a place where like we are able to like get to a decent level of like not having hallucinations, where like the generative answers is just going to be objectively better than like regular search. And I think that's going to be the point, the tipping point for where like Google, just because of adoption, it's just
Yeah.
going to like tip the balance severely on its side. But yeah, let's see. Like, and like a lot of what is coming out from like Google leadership um doesn't fill me with confidence. But I don't know. Like it's always a tricky place to be in, like when you're um like I feel like Google has more pressure on itself than most other companies, just because of like you said, it's like essentially cannibalizing its own major product
Yep.
by making advances here. So it's just going to be more difficult for Google by definition. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting ride, I feel.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So next 5 years will be, yeah, it's going to define a lot of what happens,
Yeah.
not just in the tech space, overall,
Yep.
like as a society, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think we'll shift gears into like I just wanted to like kind of like zoom out a little
Okay.
bit. Like we spoke um a little bit about like each of the companies and what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
but this is where like I feel like um the stuff that is more interesting for me when like we look at like more larger trends and like what it means for like the general user and like how it's going to affect society as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll kind of try to zoom out. We'll talk about LLMs as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go over like I know we kept mentioning LLMs, like, but can you start off by saying what an LLM is and
Mm-hmm.
like potentially like maybe give us like a very easy to understand version of like how it works, maybe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. LLMs are large language models, which is what all the hype about now is. You can think of it as just, a black box that has seen a lot of text, trillions of words of text,
Mm,
and because of looking at that much text, has kind of figured out patterns in the languages, and
mm,
it knows what is the next, given a particular set of words or sentences, it knows what the next most appropriate word is. Like that's
mm,
kind of what LLMs do. So they just predict, probability based. They predict what the next most apt word for this situation is, or for this given input is, and they just
mm,
output the one word which has the highest probability. That's all they do, and that's kind of why there is all this conversation about, are they sentient? Do they have consciousness? Are they, and all of this? The argument is they're just a robot that just predicts what the next right word is,
mm,
and like they're also interpolative databases where
mm,
they have taken in so much text, and there are clever ways of representing text as called embeddings, where the text is converted to a format that encodes the relationship between different words. For example, if you have like 10 words as a small sample set, and and you're talking about a bunch of animals, and you're talking about the food that they eat in this multi-dimensional space, which is called the embedding space,
mm,
all the animals would be grouped closer together than like the food. Like the food and animal words would be further apart, like in terms of distance,
mm,
they'd be further apart from each other than what the two animal names would be right next to each other. So that's kind of an example. And when you put, let's say, all of the content on different languages together, or let's say you create one space for English, then you have this massive representation of different words or tokens in this context to help understand those relationships. And these LLMs can choose what's the next right word. So this is kind of what they do for English or other languages, or even coding for that matter.
okay. So when you say
Mm-hmm.
that it chooses the next right word.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you define right? Isn't it just based on like the data set, right? Like, so if there's if a certain word always precedes a different phrase
Mm-hmm.
more often than not
Mm-hmm.
in the data set or like the training model,
Mm-hmm.
um, it is going to say that this is likely to be the answer, right? Is that an
Yes.
accurate
So
statement? Yeah.
yeah, that is accurate. It's one is like there's a lot of text that's used. For
Mm,
example, like the latest model from Meta was trained on 15 trillion tokens,
mm,
which kind of includes almost the entirety of the web or whatever. Like it includes all of Wikipedia and everything. But it's
mm.
not just based on the previous word; it's based on the previous n words.
Yep. Hmm.
So it kind of it's called attention, where it's able to understand for what is what's the next right word based on this entire context that I have, not just the
Mm.
previous word.
Okay. And you would assume that like there's not going to be single sources of information for, like you said, like this group of words followed by
Mm-hmm.
the other group of words, right? So like there's going to be, I don't know, if let's say the language model is like generating a sentence where it is talking about how many legs a dog has, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be, I don't know, millions of like references to dogs having four legs.
Mm-hmm.
There's also probably going to be some references somewhere about like dogs with three legs, but those are going to
Mm-hmm.
be much fewer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so if this is the case, I would assume that it's going to like look at the majority of the information and it's going to decide what is right and wrong. If
Mm-hmm.
that is the case,
Mm-hmm.
why do we currently have this problem of hallucination? And it
Mm-hmm.
would, I guess it's also like a good opportunity for you to kind of like touch on what hallucination is.
Mm-hmm.
But like, why do we still have these cases where like Gemini, for example, tells you like when you ask a question, how many rocks should I eat? It picks out like one random source
Mm-hmm.
um, out of like probable millions or like more
Mm-hmm.
and tells me that, hey, you need to eat 5 rocks a day or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So why does this happen right now?
Yeah. So LLMs, like they don't have genuine comprehension of the information they process.
Hmm.
So they're just operating based on statistical patterns that they see in the text.
Hmm.
And one thing that kind of causes hallucination is they don't really know what they don't know.
Mm,
Where like whereas in humans, like when you are asked a question, you kind of think, and if you don't know, like you can say that you don't know.
mm,
But the way the models operate is it's going to try to give you the best answer that it has.
mm,
And in cases like it's not exactly translative to the cases with the example that you gave about Gemini. Like Gemini is trying to ground its answers on Reddit responses.
mm,
Like both, you and I use Reddit a lot for
mm.
a lot of different cases. We are kind of able to filter out what's
Yep.
crap and what's not. But with Google trying to ground its information on real world responses, I think it's still rough around the edges, where it's still picking
Mm,
up things, though it's still grounded. It's not valid information. Like
mm,
anybody could have said anything.
mm,
So it's a mix of the LLMs not being able to comprehend for themselves what's right and
mm,
what's not, and at the end of the day, it's just a machine of equations,
mm,
executing a bunch of equations with a set of inputs, and then you're pulling out numbers on the other end, which is shown to you as
mm,
words. So that's kind of what causes hallucination a lot. And
mm,
I think along with driving the cost down for inferences, solving hallucination is where most of the field is focusing on, like on the research side.
mm,
There's a
mm.
lot of focus because that's obviously the biggest problem to adoption and
Yep.
usage. So yeah, that's kind of where this whole concept of hallucination comes from. But
Mm,
on the flip side, hallucination is horrible for factual questions and answers, but
mm,
hallucination is awesome for creativity.
mm,
You want the models to hallucinate. You want them to be creative and think of things that you would not probably think about, like color combinations or or anything of
Hmm.
that sort. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. When you look at it from
Mm.
this side, it kind of hurts you more.
Mm. Okay, that's an interesting point. We'll table the conversation around
Mhm,
creativity for a little later, but on the hallucination front, right? So
mhm.
it does look like you think that this is a problem that can be solved. Like even going back to like the example of Google and Reddit, right?
Mhm.
Does Google or like any other like language model, do they actively do any kind of like conscious ranking of data sources, or is it more so like, hey, treat everything the same? Like you said, like we know that okay, like Reddit is probably not the best source of
Mhm.
information.
Mhm.
Trust these other sources more than
Mhm.
like other stuff. Does
Mhm.
that is there a way to like kind of like embed that knowledge that we possess into a language model? Or like, does this have to be something that, like Google has to like hard code, or like, is this something that Google has to like explicitly tell its models to like not use as like sources of truth?
Yeah, so there are always multiple sources that you can pull information from, and there are ways that you could, bias the model towards picking one source over the other.
Mm,
But yeah, I think none of us would ever have access to know how Google has set up its
mm,
layers. Like even before, like for any large language model that we talk to, that's hosted by companies out there. There is a
mm,
lot of layers of software before we even get to the model.
mm,
Like the multiple trust and security layers that
mm,
kind of have different models looking at your question before sending it to the actual model to understand if there is any malicious behavior or intent in your answer in your questions,
mm,
and make sure that you're not trying to trick the model or do
mm,
something that the model is not supposed to do. You still see a lot of those hacks happening, but
mm,
there is all of these different layers where you could introduce so many different things. But now, like we'll never know what the way Microsoft or Google has set up their models, or
mm,
what those hyperparameters are for these models. And that's also one reason, yeah, this is a tangent, but there's also one reason people prefer to have local models, because they can
mm,
remove the sensors for good
mm,
or bad and have complete access to the raw knowledge of the model.
mm,
But yeah, to answer your question, yes, there are ways to bias towards certain sources,
mm,
which could have more intelligence to it, which could be hard coded. But yeah,
mm,
I'm sure Google has paid a bunch of money for using Reddit's information.
mm.
They're going to put it to use.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, and like you touched on something really important, like interesting right now, where like you spoke about like localized models
Mm-hmm,
where we have control over um like what the training data is, and like
mm-hmm,
what you want your sources to be. My I don't know. Like this is more so about uh like on the topics that kind of like interested in. I'm
mm-hmm,
interested in where like where do you think the technology as a whole needs to go, right? Like so if we are talking about localized models that is running
mm-hmm,
on information that I think
mm-hmm,
needs to be trusted and relied on,
mm-hmm,
and I am going to rely on that model
mm-hmm,
for my sources of truth, someone else could be training their model on something else, and the next person and the next person. If
mm-hmm,
this becomes standard
mm-hmm,
and we get to a place where every one of us um, have our own personal language model that we interact with, and we
mm-hmm,
trust it as our source
mm-hmm,
of truth.
mm-hmm,
And if that source of truth is very different from the next person,
mm-hmm.
my fear is that we are going to enter this era of like decentralized information where like we don't share a common reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that this is already the case
Yeah.
with social media, where like we already don't live like we all live in our own echo chambers,
Mm-hmm,
where like my feed is very different from my wife's feed,
mm-hmm,
very different probably from yours, and like when we get into like topics of like uh, political disagreement
Mm-hmm.
things that are very polarizing, things that are like people are very passionate about, it just leads to like more divisiveness in society.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that having these extremely decentralized models where like
Mm-hmm.
everyone has like very like deep level control of like what they consider true,
Mm-hmm.
is that going to like affect like the already bad ecosystem of like divided like truths? Like, are we going to end up with an even more divided society?
I don't think that it will make the situation worse.
Mm,
I completely agree that's where we already are, due to a lot of content, that's the way things are pushed on us, the way we are recommended
mm,
content that we would preferably interact with. I don't know if the LLMs make it worse. I
mm,
would probably be in the camp that seeing less ads and less recommended and pushed content on me overall is better, which is what
mm,
LLMs would probably take us to. And I
mm,
think we can talk about this later on at a separate conversation where LLMs are kind of breaking the ad-based model,
mm,
which I see as an overall positive. But
mm,
having different LLMs that we talk to and kind of have our own versions of information is not going to get any worse than where it is
mm,
already. I'm not saying this will make it better, but
mm,
I don't really think that it's gonna get worse.
mm. So I guess like this is a good like tangent to like
Mm-hmm.
what Elon is saying, and like it seems to be his like mission statement with what he's doing with AI.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I don't know if I agree with like everything that he wants to do
Mm-hmm.
um with with his AI model, but like his most like commonly quoted line when he
Mm-hmm.
talks about AI is he wants it to be maximally truth seeking. Like
Mm-hmm.
I know that a lot of what he is coming from is like he doesn't want the AI to have like political biases.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was like heavily critical of when like Gemini, for example, was generating
Mm-hmm.
images of like the founding fathers of the where like it was
Yeah.
people of color.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so like there is I see a point with like trying to get maximally truth-seeking AI, like in a
Mm-hmm.
literal sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I struggle to understand or like I don't know how we would get there because like even without LLMs right now,
Mm-hmm.
as a society, we
Mm-hmm.
struggle to like align on common truths. Like we can't seem to even align on things like vaccines, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like there's way more divisive stuff than that.
Mm-hmm.
So like I just feel like in this atmosphere where like we're already struggling to like align on common truths,
Mm-hmm.
um, like trying to figure out how an AI or like any large language model
Mm-hmm.
would kind of like diverge, or like several large language models would diverge towards a common truth
Mm-hmm.
seems like a project worth doing.
Mm-hmm.
But like this would probably entail like first of all us as a society kind of like agreeing on what we're gonna call truth, right?
Yeah.
Like we like there's the scientific method, like we talk
Mm-hmm.
about like peer reviewing publications.
Mm-hmm.
So there's already this like extremely complex system that we have in place, at least
Mm-hmm.
in terms of science,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like getting to what truth is. Do
Mm-hmm.
you think there is a way to like kind of like integrate that methodology of like feedback and almost like error correction into
Mm-hmm.
LLMs, and maybe like is there like truly a technical path forward to get to maximally truth-seeking AI, or is that just one of those like illusions that we will probably never get to?
Yeah, it's actually a very profound topic. Elon's truth-seeking AI or truthful GPT, as it's being quoted,
Mhm.
sounds like, something that, yeah, we would want, like, that doesn't have any bias issues. It'll rely on
Mm.
broad sources and it'll give you the truth. Yeah, it sounds great, but uh, I haven't seen any details on how that will be achieved.
Mm.
Uh, Specifically, at least, even when, like, technical or more information on, like, how are we going to get there? I've not seen that. Do we need
Mm.
that? Yeah, it would be great to have. It's not even a question. But specifically with LLMs, like, the way I have found it really useful
Mm.
for this specific conversation is, uh, first of all, like, I don't know if we can ever agree on one holy truth for any topic. Like,
Mm.
everybody will never or cannot align on such a thing. That's because people prefer or give weightage to different factors involved in any conversation. For
Mm.
example, like we've had this conversation so many times. Like, is the
Mm.
iPhone better than an Android phone? And, like, there is no one holy truth there, right? Like,
Mm.
it's an open question. There's a lot of variables involved, and
Mm.
each of us care differently about those different variables. So
Mm.
yes, the Android phone is better from your perspective, the iPhone's better from my perspective, but that doesn't mean the other person's wrong. And
Mm.
the way I have found LLMs to be useful specifically for such conversations is, in such use cases will get better, is where you have different personas for LLM that debate these different perspectives out. And, like, I'm able to follow that entire debate and decide for myself, like, which side I resonate with more. And
Mm.
I don't know if the answer is always binary. And in many cases, there could be multiple versions of the answer. And having a partner to kind of bounce that idea off and listen to my opposing argument is great to have. And I'd put an LLM in that place and have that give me my like, be the devil's advocate.
Mm.
So it's again, it comes down to how you put a technology to use.
Mm.
You could, do bad things with it or use it, like, take,
Mm.
like, bad feedback from it. But at the same
Mm.
time, like, given the option to do this, like, I would say that these this technology makes that scenario better, given that
Mm.
as an individual, that person also wants to make it better.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, the only place, like, you could make the same argument that you made about, like, hey, like, iPhone and Android, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have different perspectives, and, like,
Mm-hmm.
we can, like, agree to disagree. There's no right answer there.
Mm-hmm.
There's no objective truth there. Um, and that is probably the case for, like, most topics. My problem really is that it's not about the fact that we will not align on, like,
Mm-hmm.
one, like, absolute truth when it
Mm-hmm.
potentially doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
My problem is more so will just continue or exacerbate the current trend of polarization that already exists in social media. Like, talking about even the same topic, right? iPhone
Mm-hmm.
versus Android. If I am someone who
Mm-hmm.
likes Android and,
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm on Twitter
Mm-hmm.
and I follow pages that are telling me that are just, like, continuously reinforcing with me that, like, hey, Android is much better than Apple,
Mm-hmm.
and the algorithm is made in such a way that I'm going to, like, stay in this echo chamber where, like, I just keep getting positively reinforced about my belief,
Mm-hmm.
and I never see this opposing view.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to get more and more polarized,
Mm-hmm.
and this just becomes more sinister with more, like, with examples that have greater, like, real world consequences, right?
Mm-hmm.
So kind of extrapolating from there to LLMs, where, like, if some of these LLMs are going to have certain biases,
Mm-hmm.
and there's going to be, like based on who uses it, they're
Mm-hmm.
going to always be inundated with these biases without them having, like, too much information as to where these biases are coming from, which is exactly what social media is already doing.
Mm-hmm.
um is that going to, like, kind of, like, worsen the problem? Because, like, at least in social media, I have this odd person where like in the comment section, someone's disagreeing with, or like someone has like, I'm sorry, like everyone disagrees with everything on social media, but like there could be something that someone from the other side says that's like, oh, okay, I hadn't thought about that. Like it at least gives me like an avenue to like potentially interface with the other side if I wanted to. But I don't know if you get to this like black box like LLM answering machine that I don't like. It's just giving me answers, right? And like if I ask it the right enough questions, it's always going to like agree with what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You said okay, like I can make it be the devil's advocate and um like challenge me for opposing views, but that is more so a description of you as a person and like what you chose rather than what the LLM wants to do. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Like I'm not trying to say like maybe you're right, and I'll probably agree with you for the most part that it might not get significantly worse because it's already pretty shitty. But I'm more so seeing this like how can this be an opportunity for us to get to a place where there's more, like we can at least have less polarization. Is this going to be our ticket out of it? Because like you said, social media is very like it's basically a slave to the ad model. The LLMs are not, right? So is there something that we could potentially do differently that rescues us from this like trap that we've kind of like fallen into?
Potentially, yes. Like I don't know about seeking the truth, but one thing that I would probably do is like this is something that I would probably do right after we hang up today is where you could go add instructions to all these LLMs, and there are very well known techniques like chain of thought and tree of thoughts where
Mm,
the LLM either explains you what it did or in
mm,
tree of thoughts it takes multiple different perspectives and
mm,
kind of gets to something else and it shows you those
mm,
tree of thoughts. But I would
mm,
ask ChatGPT to always give me opposing perspectives when I'm using
mm,
the LLM. Go add it to that. So I have access to that opposing perspective. But
mm,
I agree with you that if the access to the opposing perspective is available, but not for someone who doesn't pick it up.
mm,
So maybe the I wouldn't say it's a ticket out of this, but something
mm,
that could make it better is you force LLMs in general, or people who build these products in general,
mm,
to not just agree with the user, but
mm,
always provide an opposing argument.
mm.
So maybe that is something that could be done that helps the case.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really possible because I don't think there's any incentive for. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any incentive for a provider to bias their models one way or another, or to always make
Mm,
them agree with the user. Uh,
mm,
so maybe, yeah, that's something that could make the situation better if that's how products are built.
mm. It's true. I don't know. Maybe there's some incentive to make it agree with the user. Like
Yeah.
if the AI is telling me I'm an idiot all the time. I mean,
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
yeah.
True.
No, but it's an interesting kind of like conundrum. I don't know if like yeah, like it would be interesting to see how like especially the more traditional tech companies like Google and Apple,
hmm
where they've like openly put themselves left of center.
hmm
So like I don't know, like it'll be interesting to see how they deal with like some of these situations going forward.
Yeah.
It's just it's one of those things, right?
Yep.
But yeah, like I think like another thing that you kind of touched on, like
hmm
when you were like kind of explaining LLMs like right at the beginning was like
hmm
these are more so like predictive models,
hmm
and like they don't truly understand the context, right? So this is another like very like I would say like a pretty like divisive debate
hmm
among like AI folks that I follow on social media is
hmm
if large language models can eventually lead to general intelligence, right?
hmm
So like I think like before we answer that question, I think there's some value in like kind of like answering the question of like what we think intelligence is, and like, or specifically what general intelligence is, and like then it'll make more sense to be like to talk about if LLMs are going to lead to like intelligence. So what in your perspective do you consider as general intelligence?
Yeah, so in terms of like general intelligence, for me, it falls into like three buckets, like three
Mm-hmm.
steps, I would call it.
Mm-hmm.
So starts with observation, in one form or another, reasoning, the
Mm-hmm.
observation, and then deduction. So that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
my three-step process on what I would call intelligence. And on top of that, like based on, and it's not like a one-shot thing, based on, it's like a collective knowledge where based
Yep.
on everything that you've observed,
Yep.
are you able to adapt to things that you've never seen before? Are you able to make
Mm-hmm.
those relationships? Are you able to deduce if A equal to B equal to C, B like B is equal to C?
Yep.
Yeah, the associativeness and all of that. So that's kind of what, in my opinion, is intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if there is a path to general intelligence through LLMs. I'm sure there's a lot of PhDs that are trying to figure that out as well. But just based on my understanding of how these models work and how the tech behind it is implemented, these are like static models. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
trained and then they're like a static binary file.
Mm-hmm.
And you give it some input numbers, it spits out some input numbers. That's the lowest level explanation that I
Mm-hmm.
have for how these LLMs work during inference.
Mm-hmm.
But there is no form of adaptive dynamism where, okay, like it got something that's not seen before, so it's kind of trying to adapt itself to answer this new thing that it's never seen before. That doesn't really happen. It's very
Mm-hmm.
static. Can LLMs be extended to become dynamic? I honestly don't have the answer to that. I cannot say yes or no because I don't think I know enough on that front. But what LLMs are right now are not general intelligence. They're really impressive predictive machines with a lot
Mm-hmm.
of other optimizations on top of them that make it look. I don't think anybody is claiming general intelligence either. These are they are marketed as what they are.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where intelligence falls for me. Like, yeah, curious to know what you think as well.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Like those three steps, the only other thing that I would add is probably like memory, but like remembering past experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and like, um, but I think you hit the nail on the head, right? Like it's about adapting or being able to adapt to situations
Mm-hmm.
that you've never experienced before, and like
Mm-hmm.
that that has to be the definition of intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, like even with like some of the associative like reasoning that you
Mm-hmm.
said, like there are LLMs that are able to crack that, right? Like if you give it um like I don't know, like a sequential equation, like
Mm-hmm.
it is able to like follow that path even if that exact solution doesn't exist in its entire like training model.
Mm-hmm.
um but I think I am also on the side of like, okay, like predictive modeling is like not really intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
It is more so like, hey, I see this pattern of operation. Potentially, I could apply it to this other source of operation, um, and we go from there. I saw this recent video on a podcast
Mm-hmm.
uh, with Francois Chollet.
Mm-hmm.
He's a I think he's with Google.
Mm-hmm.
He's a research scientist, and he has like this this test bench for like general intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, most LLMs perform pretty poorly at it.
Yeah.
Um, so like there seems to be like, yeah, there seems to be some like gaps
Mm-hmm.
um like between like what LLMs can do and like what intelligence is.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of like ties in to like the bigger question of like, okay, if LLMs are not going to like lead to true intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and you need, or like if we can agree on the fact that you need that kind of intelligence to make discoveries, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
if I like, let's say I wanted to like find the cure for cancer, or like Alzheimer's, or like something like that, that's going to
Mm-hmm.
need intelligence.
Yes.
Um, and if that is not what these large language models are like designed to do,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think is the end game for LLMs? What does the best version of an LLM like 5 years from now,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think that is doing for us as a society?
Uh, yeah, that was a loaded question. Uh,
Yeah.
I think to start with, yeah, I think the ARC challenge is really interesting. I think certain things that already demonstrate the predictive nature of the models is the way the current tests are done. So
Mm,
anytime you see a publication of a model from anybody out there like Meta or Google or Apple or anyone,
mm,
there's certain benchmarks they all talk about.
mm,
And those benchmarks typically revolve around language understanding, where they ask
mm,
questions on basic anatomy, geography, or
mm,
whatever. And then there is coding tests where the model has to code. Then
mm,
there is also this GSM tests, like grade school math tests.
mm,
And on all of these tests, like these tests have evolved a lot. Not more than 3 years ago, these language understanding tests looked completely different. Those
mm,
tests have been decimated by these new models. Like they're hitting 100%, so there's no point in testing them. So the tests get harder. And I think that we've
mm,
had 4 iterations on language understanding. We're on the fifth iteration of a harder test.
mm,
But one thing that you will see is there are different ways of prompting the model during testing. And most of these tests are multiple choice questions. You are
mm,
saying, this is the question, you have 4 options, pick the right option. And the way you prompt the model could be very different, where you just pick the model and you give it the question and the options, and you tell it to answer the question, and then it picks the answer. It picks an
mm,
answer and gives it to you. But what's mostly used is a few shot prompting method, where
mm,
you give the model five, or like if it's 5 shot, you give it 5 questions with all of the options, and you give it the answers. So this is the
mm,
question, this is the answer for five examples. And then now I'm asking you a question, and now pick the right answer. And every time you increase the number of shots that you're prompting, the model performs much better because it's
mm,
able to understand and analyze those patterns. Okay, on
mm,
these 5 questions, okay, this was the pattern. This is how this answer was predicted. Just apply the same template to the question now you're asking me, and
mm,
give you the right answer. So 10 shot would perform better than 5 shot. And sometimes there's
mm,
also a chain of thought prompting where you explain in those 5 examples how that became the right answer. So
mm,
even though the model has not looked at the same question in the past, it has templates of such question
mm,
answers. And it's able to understand the path on how this question came to this answer. So I will kind of use that same template to answer
mm,
this question I gave you. So that's how
mm,
most of the tests today are. And you do see, these models performing really well. Just because like on the, for example, multitask language understanding test, like I tried taking that test and I failed miserably.
mm.
uh, it was bad. But these models do well. That doesn't mean it's intelligence. Like they're
Yeah.
able to recognize those patterns on the other questions and
Mm,
use those in the question that you're giving it. And I'm sure it has seen a lot of those patterns on the other text as well.
mm,
But the ARC challenge kind of goes a different route where it's difficult to train the model on that particular type
mm,
of questions. The questions in the ARC challenge are something that you and I could probably do better on than some of
mm,
the other tests. So that's kind of why it's really interesting. And in terms of your question about where LLMs will end up in 5 years, and
mm,
if they're not designed to cure cancer, like where does that leave us? Like not every useful tool has to cure cancer, in my opinion.
mm,
And LLMs have proven to be useful already,
mm,
and I see them being a lot more useful. But I don't know if they'll cure cancer. So the
mm,
only place that becomes a problem is are people who are working on and focusing on building general intelligence now moving away from that approach and doing
Mm,
LLMs? Are they going to, if this is not a path to go there, like, are we wasting time on this for those people, not for everybody else?
mm,
For everybody else, this is already a useful tool for many things that we do, and it's going to make
mm,
life better in general.
mm,
An overall net positive, I would call it. Probably not for everyone. So yeah, that's kind of where that leaves me. But 5 years from now, where do we see these models uh, like agents that can achieve end-to-end operations? Take a task, split it up, do the task, complete it end to
mm,
end. I wouldn't even say that's 5 years, or that's probably sooner. I've seen
mm.
something over the last few years, like anything that we think 5 years out is probably 6 months out. Um, so where we go from there is, yeah, I think that's up for dreaming.
Mm,
Uh, so yeah, that's kind of where I stand on this AGI versus
mm.
RLLMs, the thing to be investing time in.
Yeah, no, like one thing that you mentioned, and this is also some like one of the criticisms of Francois was like
Mhm.
basically LLMs have sucked the oxygen out of the room. Like everyone's just doing LLMs
Ah,
right now.
okay, okay.
We just don't have like the brain power, like focusing
Mm-hmm.
on other stuff right now. And like he was like
Mm-hmm.
pretty disappointed with that.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting. Like I mean, I do get it. Like the reason why I ask where you see LLMs 5 years from now is yes, they seem to be really good at
Mm-hmm.
like the tasks that they're meant to do. Like you said, for like use cases, right? Like agents
Mm-hmm.
automating tasks, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
um, hey, like if this can do all of my like scheduling for me, if it can do all
Mm-hmm.
of my emails for me, if it can do all my coding for me, leaves me to do true intelligence tasks for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it'll probably like it's going to help out even with like a lot of creative work.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like there is also like this downside of like it looks like these LLMs seem to be very good at skill sets that are traditionally taken up by knowledge workers, like
Mm-hmm.
people right now who are like typically on the upper echelon of like income.
Mm-hmm.
So this seems to be like disproportionately affecting a certain type of labor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's it's up for debate, like if it's okay for like this work to like progress in this direction or not. But like it's
Mm-hmm.
inarguable right now that we are going to like experience some kind of impact to like the labor market at
Mm-hmm.
least in the next 5 years, and it's going to
Mm-hmm.
like disproportionately hurt knowledge workers. So that is the bigger picture question of like, okay, like we know that this is the trend that we've like embarked down. We
Mm-hmm.
know that this is the end goal of like large language models.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to like pursue this path? Like, is this worth doing? Or like should
Mm-hmm.
we focus on like stuff that is like more important, right? Like, or like would better serve like the greater good of like
Mm-hmm.
humanity as a whole? Like, can we automate away like dangerous jobs? Should we be focusing on robotics and like
Mm-hmm.
intelligence around that? Like, should we be focusing on like different forms of AGI that can give us truly novel solutions to problems that we've been stuck on for a long time?
Mm-hmm.
Or like, should the smartest people, right? Like you said earlier in this conversation, the smartest people with the highest amount of dollars,
Mm-hmm.
are we working on the wrong problem
Mm-hmm.
right now? I get like that this is capitalism, right? Like we
Yeah.
we are going to um, like the technology and progress is just going to go towards where the money is.
Mm-hmm.
But like that's where I would ask the question of like how much of this is down to like regulation, like how
Mm-hmm.
can we like kind of like nudge the technology and the progress in a direction that is just going to result in like better net positive like for like everyone involved? Is there stuff that we can do to like kind of like course correct maybe?
So to answer your question, is this should we go down this path? I think we absolutely will because of
Mm,
where the revenue is. I think there
mm,
is no stopping that machine. But in terms of should we be focusing on like is this a distraction from AGI? Like one thing that we know
mm,
is like probably that this is not what AGI is, but we still don't know if this is a step towards that or if this is a
mm,
step in the right direction.
mhm,
This has been in many decades a significant step towards general reasoning and understanding at least,
mm,
uh, which if you zoom out looks like a step in the right direction. So I don't know if we should abandon this and move to something else unless there is a more promising path.
mm,
So yeah, that's I think the jury is still out on if this is a step towards that. If it is, then yes, maybe time should be spent on this. I'm sure a lot of great researchers do argue that it's not a step towards that, which could also be the case, but that's still out for debate. In terms of, I think this definitely has rekindled the fire under robotics,
mm,
with a lot more investments going into bipedal robots or all sorts of robots,
mm,
especially because now these models can really reason about the environment like visually,
mm,
which is what was lacking in the past, where you could have like really efficient motors moving around, but
mm,
how do you really interact with an object was something that a robot could not reason about in the wild. In a controlled
mm,
environment, yes, but if it's picking up something like what is this and how does it interact with that was not something that
mm,
robots could reason about, but now it's possible. You see robots with even GPT-4 on them, where they take in visual information. It's a lot of compute power, but still,
mm,
yeah, take in information and reason about the environment. So it's
mm,
definitely helping in that direction. And again, going back to probably what we have right now is not intelligence. I'm not really too worried about being replaced of any sort in terms of coding
mm,
or whatever. For me, so far it's been a big boost in performance.
mm,
Like I'm multiple times faster in the things that I do, the way I do things. Outputs are better. I'm able to,
mm,
debug faster, talk about, like reason about or bounce ideas off of much better. So it's been a
mm,
really good tool for me so far. And I
mm,
don't see, at least I'm not worried at this point.
mm,
Uh, Maybe when we get to AGI, yes.
mm,
But I still see it as like an important tool,
mm,
and it would be really bad on my part to not use this tool. Like
mm.
if I'm if I'm someone who's not using this tool, I'd be worried about someone who's using the tool replacing me, not the tool itself replacing.
Do you think that we are going to get to that place where like there's going to be fully automated software engineers?
Versions of that have been floating around
Mm,
that have not been very successful. But I don't know. Like I don't really have an answer for that. Will we get there? Maybe
mm,
because like coding is an easier problem to solve than general language. It has more
mm,
structure to it and it's like a lot more strict, well defined than general language, natural
mm,
language. So yeah, but I think there'll always be better things to do. This is something
mm,
we've gone through a lot of times in the past. Like we've had the industrial revolution, we've had a lot of automation. Yes, it does affect different classes of society differently. But I would always like I strongly believe that there are better things that we will find to do rather
mm,
than being completely replaced and out of a job.
mm. Coming to like we talked about creativity a little earlier
Mm-hmm.
in the chat, and like
Mm-hmm.
we set it aside for later, but like one aspect
Mm-hmm.
that current LLMs are pretty good at doing
Mm-hmm.
is gen content,
Mm-hmm.
including creative content. So if I was a writer who's writing like articles about, I don't know, like football games,
Mm-hmm.
um, you could potentially get an AI to do that, or
Mm-hmm.
like get an LLM to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I can see we could potentially get to a point where like this podcast could just be two large language models talking to each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that seems to be a much more ideal or like
Mm-hmm.
non-ideal outcome in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like this is what we're doing this podcast because we want to, and like
Mm-hmm.
we enjoy doing this,
Mm-hmm.
and like it acts as like I would say like a creative release. Um, and if we're able to get tools that are able to do this much more efficiently and cheaply, at least from like a media company perspective, I mean, I'm sure like people who do it as a hobby or like do it for like we're still gonna do it, but like as a media company who's running like a company, it makes more sense to just get an LLM to do it for you. So now you're stuck with this like, hey, like we're losing like creativity is being taken over by LLMs, and that
Mm-hmm.
has traditionally been classified as one of the more like human things.
Mm-hmm.
So like what are your thoughts on that? And like and recently I think CTO of like OpenAI, she said something crazy. Um I think she said like if creative jobs, I'm paraphrasing, but like if creative jobs are being replaced by LLMs and they're doing a better job at it, maybe those creative jobs shouldn't have existed in the first place, or something like that. Um, it's kind of tricky,
Mm-hmm.
like that side of things, where like when you like it's already becoming difficult when you
Mm-hmm.
if you give me like an article or a song that's composed by a human and an AI, it's basically like impossible to like tell them apart.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You might enjoy the AI version more than the other one,
Mm-hmm.
but that it just seems to be something robotic and
Mm-hmm.
unnatural about the fact that this was just like it's just predictive output
Mm-hmm.
um, from like a language model. I would think like even if there was like some like I don't think my bias is towards like this being like generated by an AI. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like if there was an AI out there that had some level of like sentience and it knew how it felt to create music or like
Mm-hmm.
to write a poem, and it was truly able to like enjoy it
Mm-hmm.
and then it put that out, I would still respect that, like
Mm-hmm.
equal to like what a human did. But like
Mm-hmm.
this seems like just like there's just no like it's just a predicted
Mm-hmm.
output for like what is probably like the best possible outcome. And it's not true creativity.
Yeah.
So there's some like I feel like this is like a purely like philosophical at this point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But like what are your like intuitions on that front? Do you think there's something interesting to talk about this, or is it just like it's what it is kind of a thing?
No, I think I have a probably an unpopular opinion on this. Maybe I'm not
Hmm.
sure, but yeah, I think there is a lot of disruption there in terms of you know jobs and companies trying to optimize for cost will probably pick the easier path and try generating things like for example there are already cases where all of these apparel companies they don't use real models and photographers anymore. They just
Mm,
use models to display their product on
mm,
human generated human figures. So yeah,
mm,
all of that's there, but when it comes to like creativity specifically, I think the value of human creativity would probably go up
mm,
than down uh, for a couple of reasons. And I think there are a couple of good examples as well. One is uh, when like I'm watching, like I'm following somebody on Twitter or I'm watching somebody on YouTube. Let's say I'm watching MKBHD on YouTube. Like I could today Google for what the iPhone 15 Pro, what's different about it, and I could
mm,
get like 100 articles. But like I'm watching his YouTube video for what he thinks about it. Like I
mm,
want to get his insights, and it's not about general news. So I
mm,
think that relationship between the consumer and the creator will become all the more important than what it was before.
mm,
And somewhere we've seen such thing as where, when, the Stockfish chess engine came out, like people thought that,
mm,
we've broken chess and chess is not going to be an important game anymore. But
mm,
like we couldn't have been more wrong, right? Like we could, for all that matters, we could let two Stockfish engines play each other and watch that match, but nobody does. Like we
mm,
still watch the candidates tournaments for the players and we use Stockfish as a bar to compare players against and understand the game
Mm,
better. So I
mm,
think there is still a place for human creativity. The
mm,
magnitude of that might be different, and
mm,
the relationship between the consumer and creator will become stronger.
mm,
And we would follow people for, in terms of art or news or whatever, on what their insights are, and not just for consumption.
mm. I do think that that means only high quality content from true creators is going to like survive. And I think that's kind of what the CTO of OpenAI she was touching on, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's going to become more cutthroat for
Mm-hmm.
like low quality content is just gonna get replaced by like AI generated content, and like
Mm-hmm.
people who truly add value in that creative space are
Mm-hmm.
always going to thrive. But yeah, I would argue that it's always been that way. Like the true top 5% of like creatives are always going to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just going to be a pretty large impact on the rest of the 95% of like the casual creators. So
Mm-hmm.
um, it's going to be. I feel like it is going to be disruptive. I think this kind
Mm-hmm.
of like kind of leads towards like the conclusion, right? Like, are we optimistic about the future of AI in general or not, right? My my overall kind of like stance around this
Mm-hmm.
has been like my general thinking is like progress is good. Like
Mm-hmm.
strongly believe in like enlightenment principles. I think that throughout human history, every step of the way, like even when we've questioned progress
Mm-hmm.
has been good.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that we like we got to this point without questioning um like the new innovations.
Mm-hmm.
And like that is exactly what needs to happen right now. We need to be smart
Mm-hmm.
about how we uh, like boundaries for LLMs,
Mm-hmm.
how we think about general intelligence, how we talk about AGI. We didn't really talk about like AGI and like how a post super intelligence world would look like. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that's a little bit of a large tangent from that topic, so that can be something
Mm-hmm.
for a different day. But
Mm-hmm.
all of those things need to be stuff that we're talking about right now. And by
Mm-hmm.
we, I mean like governments need to be talking about this, like regulators need to be talking about this. Big tech companies um, need to be held accountable for um, like long-term visions of like what we think would be like a safe way to like transition
Mm-hmm.
um, from like a non-LLM world to like an LLM world, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be, I feel that kind of a change. It's going to be like non-internet to internet. We had to like the government had to do multiple programs. There was like so many programs about like learning to code for like people above 50 who didn't have that skill set, right? Like so there's going to have to be some kind of like safety net
Mm-hmm.
that like gets put in place by legislation that will help us make this transition smoothly. And I also feel like this is a huge opportunity for like some of the more like developing countries, like for example India. Like this could be
Mm-hmm.
like a huge opportunity if the government in India like plays their cards right. Like
Mm-hmm.
we need to get ahead of like the curve and think
Mm-hmm.
about what a post LLM world looks like, and like
Mm-hmm.
how we take this huge manpower reserve that is India and like make value out of that,
Yeah.
because otherwise it's just gonna like backfire so badly. Like if
Mm-hmm.
there's just so many knowledge workers in India, like we just have so many people going through engineering courses, so many people working in like tasks that can be pretty easily automated away
Mm-hmm.
by LLMs. Countries like India, which and a lot of other Asian countries where like labor that is automatable exists need to
Mm-hmm.
be thinking about this much more seriously than even like the United States. So yeah, like my overall kind of like summary of like what I think about this topic is like we need to make progress, but we
Mm-hmm.
need to make progress with guardrails. Like those guardrails, like it seems like those guardrails are being established by the whims of like what the tech companies want, and that
Mm-hmm.
needs to change. Like we need to have more like guidance from like people who are like thinking about the society and like what it does to like set more forcible boundaries for the
Mm-hmm.
larger tech companies.
No, but I agree as well. But for me, the perspective for me is different for different personas of myself. For example, as an ML engineer, like there couldn't be a better time to be in this field.
Mm,
Like it's super exciting. Like things change every day.
yeah.
Problems are being solved. Usually things take years for some things to change, and now it's in like
Mm,
days or weeks. New companies, new models, ideas, concepts, and like things that are moving faster than even I can keep track of. So
mm,
it's amazing to be in the middle of all of this. As a user, I'm a very happy user. Where
mm,
like I have tools like new shiny toys that work really well for when used within the boundaries of you know
mm,
when these things work well, like
mm,
chatbots that you can talk to, like a car that assists driving a lot. So all of that's like great as a user.
mm,
As a member of the society, like thought long and hard about what I feel about this, and there's like multiple schools of thought.
mm,
Um, I would say I'm just curious. Like I'm not
mm,
calling doomsday on this. Uh,
mm,
and the optimist in me wants to, say whatever you ended with. Like, we need to change and have those guardrails established that are
mm,
clear and kind of guide us in the right path. But the realist in me kind of feels that it's going to be chaos.
mm.
And regulation and all of that is going to catch up later on after a lot of chaos because uh,
Can we
even when
afford to have chaos in this field? Like that, I feel like that's the big difference here. Like I feel like this is, or maybe like this is where like I'm gonna sound alarmist. I feel like this is one of those areas where like at least with or like definitely with AGI, like
hmm
we can't afford to get it wrong.
hmm
Maybe with the LLMs, it's pretty comparable to like something like the Industrial Revolution,
hmm
and like we could like make a bunch of mistakes and we'll still be fine. But yeah, like it like at least to me, like getting AGI and like it's definitely going to lead to super intelligence, right? Like
hmm
if we don't get that right, I
hmm
feel like that's going to be yeah, that's just not going to work out. So like that's kind of the only place where like I'm a little more alarmist than I would like to be.
hmm
But yeah, that's kind of the my overall take on that. Yeah.
yeah, I think this is also going to sound alarmist if you think LLMs are industrial revolution and AGI is probably the nuclear bomb. And we kind of figured out a way to uh, make that work or still, you know,
Mm,
coexist with such technologies around. So
mm,
be optimistic that we figure it out with AGI as well. But yeah, it's wait, we'll wait and watch.
yep. I think we can end on that topic. Or
Hmm.
I'll actually end with like one question where you
Yeah.
will say yes or no, right?
Okay.
So, do you think in the next
hmm
5 years there is
hmm
going to be chatbots like from the movie Her and people are falling in love with it?
I don't think that's 5 years away. It's lesser than 5 years away.
So yes.
Yes.
All right. I think we'll end on that. This was awesome. A lot longer than I expected. But no, but like I think this was good and a lot of interesting stuff that came out of this.
hmm
I feel like we'll continue to do. Like, I feel like this is like an ever changing topic. So I think
hmm
um, there's bound to be stuff that surprises us. and like hopefully we can do this more often
Yeah,
in the future.
yeah. Maybe every time a big tech company has a keynote, we should talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
No,
Awesome.
yeah, this was fun. This was a lot of fun for me. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. This was great. All right, guys. See you.